Hi, I'm Paul Levy, and we're going to talk about an AI framework for Buberian Dialog. Let's jump right to it. So Buberian refers to Martin Buber, and Buber is most famous for his work on I, it, I, thou, I, it being shallow, superficial levels of conversation, and I, thou being more deep interaction between two or more people. And the question is, how do you jump from one to the other? So first, let's look at it from a modern social media context in terms of how do those Buberian components play out in a social media world. And the way they play out is that social media, by definition, is selfish and self-conscious. The selfish part can be anything from people wanting to get more followers, people wanting to monetize it, to the self-consciousness of worrying about your appearance on social media in terms of projecting an image that may not be real. That's part of the I, it, and using other people to achieve those goals. So by definition, they're pretty shallow. So let's scroll a little bit over and let's talk about conversational volume. So the volume is the social media platforms. That's what they care about. They care about volume. So right off the bat, their purpose is not to have deep conversation, but voluminous conversation. As volume goes up, monetization goes up. Advertisers go up, creates monetization, and it's a pretty simple chain effect. So it's very volume oriented, and therefore, if you get deep conversation, that wasn't exactly the goal. That may happen, and it does happen, but it's certainly not the goal of the platforms to do that. So the algorithm is put ahead of people. The algorithm is designed to engage you, to keep pinging you, to keep giving you thumbs up and hearts and all kinds of things to keep you engaged, and metrics to track everything and just keep you hooked on it. When humans do get involved in these systems, they tend to be awkward. People trying to tap down the algorithm. The algorithm's bad. It's doing all these bad things. So let's intervene a little bit so the algorithm doesn't look so bad. All of that doesn't go anywhere except where we are today. That's the state of affairs in social media, which is and has become the main form that people are communicating, especially in a COVID lockdown situation. It becomes that way even more so. So the question is, how do you get the best of systems? How do you get the best of technology systems, of databases that are storing conversations, NLP, which is enhancing conversations through, let's call it healthy chatbot integration, if you can believe that there is such a thing, and machine learning that actually is helpful and isn't preemptive and isn't controlling the conversation. And here's a list of prerequisites. So it starts with what I'd call open reality. You want it to be real. You want it to be open. So open means you can look under the hood. You can see what the moving parts are. You can see who set it up, who's controlling it. You can get a real understanding of what it is that you're driving, okay? What factory it came out of, how big the engine is, all those things that people used to want to know in their car before they got behind the wheel. And you should have that in your conversation. You're driving these social media platforms, but what's under the hood? Who's running it? Most of the answer is you don't know. And what you think you know, the reality is always worse than that. So it's not open, it's not real, it's contrived. How do we get away from that? So it starts with a common vocabulary. If you don't have a common vocabulary in a conversation, you're not having a conversation. You may think you're having a conversation, but you're not having a conversation. all participants in the conversation need to have a common vocabulary on what it is they're talking about. They have to agree on that common vocabulary. They got to know what those terms mean, both literally and in terms of the emotion associated with those terms, what the meaning is there. If you don't have that, you're not really having a real conversation. So common vocabulary, very important. New vocabulary. If you're having a real conversation on something very, very in-depth, and especially if it's a conversation between experts, there's a certain point in the conversation where you're going to say, I need a new vocabulary for this. We need a new vocabulary. And the system has to allow that. It doesn't happen magically. It's not instantaneous. But there's got to be a mechanism where the people running the system, the content experts in the system, get together and say, you know what? This thing we just discussed, this epiphany that we all had on this topic, we need a name for that. And you need to agree on that name, and you need to build that into the system, and then that name is going to take the system further. It's going to take the conversation to the next step. It's going to make the conversation more effective as those new terms get fed back in. So you need the real transparency. And to do that, you need structured feedback, not just thumbs up, thumbs down, like, don't like, any of that. You need structured feedback. So think of a doctor-patient relationship, right? Doctor gives a patient a treatment. Maybe it's a surgery. Maybe it's a drug. Maybe it's an in-office treatment. An hour later, how's that patient feeling? What's the feedback? So the doctor has to see what the patient said transparently. The patient has to know what are the metrics that the doctor wants to know. Oh, you got pain. On what scale? You got a rash. Tell me about that rash. Describe it. You got to quantify, you got to have that feedback. But that exists even on things that are much less tangible than that in terms of concepts and in terms of people coming up with new ideas. To do that, you need structure, but you have to put humans above the structure, which means you're going to tweak that structure, you're going to balance out that structure. You're not going to be too literal. It's not going to be like a credit score where people have a magic number and, oh, by the way, that magic number tells you everything about the person. No, neither do the SAT scores, neither do many, many other one-unit, one-dimensional metrics, even though those metrics are made up of many components. They come down to the one metric, and that hurts people in terms of algorithms taking over. You have to have human override so that when a genius comes along who just doesn't do well on the SAT, somebody's able to spot that and put that person into the right environment, for example. So you'd have natural human integration. You got a structure, but you got a system for people to manage that structure, not let that structure run away. So it's a semi-permeable hierarchy. Structure, by definition, is going to have components in it that shouldn't be changed too easily. So they've got to be semi-permeable. You got to revisit these on some interval. Maybe it's every 6 months, maybe it's every year, and determine, hey, is that structure still working? Is the hierarchy still real? Do we have to weight this thing differently? It's a process. It's a live, interactive process. Then you have the topic of content density. Content density is really important. And give you an example. I was looking at lesson planning for different grade groups ranging from third grade up to 12th grade high school, and looking at it in a chemistry perspective, and looking at handouts for those age ranges from 3rd up to 12th grade. And in some schools, in some public schools, the content density at 12th grade is the same as 3rd grade. You could look at the same subject and the content density is the same. You're learning about the 3 different types of matter. If your handout sheet is the same for 3rd graders as well as 12th graders, you don't have the correct content density for one of those groups. Either you're giving the third graders too much or you're giving the 12th graders too little. So it's the same thing for any group of people interacting with each other in a conversation. What's the appropriate level of content density that the subject needs, that the participants need, and the system ought to be able to level that out. Let people dive deeper into more content density and more depth of content when they need to. And those people that can't handle it need a mechanism to at least be on the periphery of the conversation to participate from the sidelines to some degree if they choose to. Content needs to be interrelated. Nothing exists in a vacuum. The definition of context means you're relating something to something else to give it context. You need that in your communication systems. It's not just raw facts. You need the vocabulary, as we said before, but you need to go beyond that. You need content to be interrelated, and the nature of those relationships need to be defined by the participants, agreed upon by the participants, and discussed by the participants. Now, when you do that, you get a conversation flow in terms of the flow that people talk about with athletes achieving flow during a sports performance, not the little flow of the conversation flow running away with you. A lot of conversational technologies tend to be very parental in their view of the participants. Oh, we're going to control the conversation flow. First, we'll talk about this, then we'll get you into this, then we'll... No, you can have structure, but you can't make it a totally path-dependent flow, and you certainly can't predict that flow with any certainty. And if you do, you're going to destroy all the sharing and inquisitive parts of the conversations and all the spontaneity. So these are the basic components in terms of content. And then in an actual system design, you need to get into how do those parts here, these conceptual parts, relate to real functional systems parts. How do they relate to different types of databases in terms of the way the databases interact with people, the way people can tag the databases, the permission levels in the databases, the basic authentication in a database, where people know who the other people actually are in the system, something we don't have in social media for the most part. You don't really know who it is on the other side in most parts of social media. You certainly don't know if identities have been compromised at different points, and you're really in there blind. The systems need to account for that. So you know with certainty that the person you're interacting with is that person. The levels of access to have higher level conversation, they need to be more open than closed. You can't try to overly clamp down these systems and have them work in terms of trying to too tightly control it. If you do that, the systems are going to be a reflection of the systems designer and not a reflection of the conversation that comes out of those systems, which is what people want. So that's the basic concept there, is moving away from the shallow I-it into the higher level I-thou, having some real world prerequisites that you need to make those systems function, having a matching set of systems, including all the DevOps necessary to create those systems, the checks and balances in those systems, and the ability for those systems to grow, for those systems to be verticalized into different levels of content. That is possible. With today's technology, it's possible to take a quantum leap in what these systems do, have them enhance human-to-human interaction and conversation, and not lead to what we've had worldwide in social media, which I think many could describe accurately as more harm than good. I think we can flip to the other side and make it a very, very positive experience. And in turn, regular people-to-people conversation post-COVID, where people are just sitting down with each other and talking, should also get better as a result. Because if you're using a system that's inherently good, it's going to change you. You're going to have a better understanding of different topics and different people, and that's going to relate into regular person-to-person, non-technology enhanced conversation. And that's the AI framework for Buberian Dialog.